All right, rambunctious crowd on this Friday here. Okay, so we are the most perfect parents in the world before we have children. You have the perfect spouse, the perfect house, the right school, and all the groundwork laid for a perfect child. You excuse the terrible twos. After all, most kids go through that kicking and screaming. But by the time many kids enter preschool, it's clear that little Johnny is no angel. And things can just get worse. He's hitting, doesn't follow directions, he's smart, but not making the grade, and his peers and sometimes teachers are starting to not like him. So what's going on? Many parents go from doctor to doctor looking for a diagnosis. Today, we want to help parents figure out how to raise that child who insists on coloring outside the lines and oftentimes seems like the square peg trying to fit into that round hole. Welcome our panel today. Dr. Gayle Gross has written her thesis on this. She feels many children are labeled as bad when it's basically a misunderstanding of human nature. Psychiatrist Dr. Jay Tarnow, he was that kid we're talking about. Today, he is one of the leading doctors in terms of diagnosing and treating kids and adults, for that matter, with that list of syndromes and disorders that we mentioned at the top of the show. And licensed therapist Megan Johnst has a child who struggled in school because of learning disabilities and attention issues. She is part of a new school program that helps these kids to succeed in the classroom by teaching them the way they learn. Please welcome them to the show today. As we say many times, since it is that village, it takes a village to raise a child, we want to hear from you, the villagers. Call us now at 713-284-1055. 713-284-1055. We'll take your calls throughout the show. You can also post your questions or comments on our Facebook page. All right, let's get started. I'll start with you, Dr. Gayle Gross. It's funny, we have all these different labels. We talked about kind of that, that alphabet soup, if you will,
right,
when ADHD is really kind of that umbrella where all these different symptoms kind of fall off of. You say a lot of this is misunderstood. It's human nature, but society is trying to fit people within these guidelines.
Right. You know, in a certain way, you could say that ADD was natural to our species. That primitive man had to multitask. He was by the river, and a lion could be coming up behind him, or another caveman, and he had to listen for his wife with the baby in a cave, and he was fishing simultaneously. So he had to be able to manage within a static environment, a lot of static. And so built into us is this ability, and today we see it in forms of ADD and ADHD, and we see it a lot, of course, more often in boys.
Yeah.
So in a sense, if you're unable to, if you're having problems with music, it's not going to hurt you. If you can't read, it'll really hurt you, and therefore you have to learn to accommodate it and treat it and manage
Easier said than done in today's society. And Dr. Tarnow, as I mentioned, you were that child. Remind people of what it was like for you growing up and the struggles you faced.
Oh, I was always angry. I couldn't read until I was in 3rd grade because I couldn't do phonetics. So I was the person who had not only ADHD, but also some reading difficulty.
Dyslexia?
Dyslexia. And it made me very angry that I couldn't read. And I felt the teacher was always picking on me because she wanted me to read out loud, and I couldn't do that. So for me, it created a great deal of anger, and I felt very isolated and different from everybody.
Yeah, and we see that with kids today, and it just kind of snowballs, because a lot of people just struggle, I mean, we did struggle just trying to find the diagnosis at first, because we went from doctor to doctor to doctor, and if it's so prevalent, you think the first doctor you would go to, they'd say, boom. You know, we walked into your office and you went, what is it you're looking for from me? And I said, I want to know what's wrong. You said it's not necessarily wrong, but here is the issue.
Well, I want to follow up on what you said, because this concept of the fact that there are 2 different types of brains anthropologically that we've realized. There are farmers who plan, organize, and wait. And then there are hunters. And the hunter brain is a perfect brain for ADHD.
Right.
And so the hunter is always scanning, and they have to go long distances, so they have to keep reservoirs of energy. So they are scanning, and they only look at things and focus on things when they're highly stimulating, like a lion chasing them.
Yeah, and of course the problem is with those 2 different types of brains, school has a tendency to focus on one type of brain. And Megan, I mentioned earlier that you see it with your own son, and you have kind of a different way of looking at school for certain kids.
Yes, and to follow up on what you said, Albert Einstein didn't start talking until he was 2, right? I didn't start, literally did not say a word until I was 2. They thought I was dumb. Now they can't shut me up. So Right? So, and spelling or reading is actually, they're finding out it's more of a gene clicking on. There are people who don't start reading till they're 10, and then they start they fly, right? So we do all of these wonderful things in school to help them read, but if they're not reading by what the book says is the real normal time, then we punish them, and it's not them. It's just that their body, their brain, clicks on at a certain time.
Yeah.
So what we're finding in education is it's very important to honor the differences, right? This child needs to jump on the trampoline to learn their math facts. That's just how they get it in, through movement.
Yeah, because and you talked about that, Dr. Gross, especially with boys, that you got to run around.
It's so unnatural to sit for 8 hours a day for anybody, girls or boys. But now we have really made great advances, great strides in understanding that, you know, that boys need movement in particular. And so we can break up their studying. If they study for 15 minutes and then walk around for a few minutes and sit down, they do much better. And now we're even building desks in schools that are standing desks, so children do not have to sit, which is a totally unnatural thing for us as a species, to just be still for 8 hours a day anyway.
The other thing I think is unnatural, but we insist on it, is that we try to make every child great at every topic.
That's right.
Look, I was a good student, but I struggled so hard in math. There was no danger that I was ever going to become an engineer. There was no, so stop throwing the math at me, because I stopped after a certain level. It's like, you know, and so we're starting to hear these rumblings of this happened to me when I started school in Taipei, Taiwan. When they found out what they thought your gift was or you're naturally good at, that's what they concentrated on, although they exposed you to the other things. Are we ever going to be ready for that in our school system? Because we insist that.
That's what our school does.
The Acton Academy?
They believe that every child is a genius of a certain sort. There are people who are gifted in the arts, and they will never be the engineer. There are people who are gifted with people skills, and they will never be the one to be the actuary sitting in a cube. So every child has their gift, and throughout their years, they might change and shift a little bit, but to be able to say, what is your calling in life? That's what this school is all about. And there's this
What do you
whole
naturally
movement.
gravitate to?
Exactly.
Well, you know, Nancy Glass, who was a producer for my...
You're not going to get a word in edgewise.
For my show.
No, I know, with two women, right? That's why they put me in the middle.
For my show, Let's Talk with Dr. Gayle Gross, I interviewed her. I said, Nancy, you have ADD. Let me interview you. And she said, okay. So I interviewed her, and she said the most interesting thing. She said, growing up, she had the worst time, similar to Dr. Tano, all this static, all this problem. But she found a career that let her do what she could do best, multitask. So she became a producer. So she could operate within all this static, and she found her place, the place that worked, the job that worked for her. And that's what we really are talking about.
All right, we're going to go to the phone lines. We have Angie on the phone this morning. Good morning, Angie.
Good morning.
What's your question or comment?
I have a nephew with ADD and ADHD, and we're able to take a road trip, and he can sit and play that video game for hours without ever even looking away. How is that possible?
Yeah, and he can't focus on other things at school. Okay, before we get to that answer, I want to back up. I should have backed up. That's what happens with the ADHD brain. You kind of start in the middle, right, instead of the beginning, and really defining what ADD and ADHD means. I remember you, Dr. Tarnow, saying when we say attention deficit, it's really attention overload.
Well, the brain is not engaged until there's something highly stimulating. So that's what gets back to your comment about passions. That when a child who has ADHD or ADD has a passion, nothing stops them. And they get overly focused, and they have this ability to hyper-focus. And that's what you're hearing in terms of this question, which is, on the video games, he has no problems concentrating.
Because he loves it.
And that's because what's happened is, with the high levels of stimulation, the part of the brain right here, the prefrontal cortex, turns on. And its ability to hyperfocus. So those people are wonderful doing things that they love. And you got to find out what they love.
You mentioned, like, your daughter. Your daughter's highly organized. One of your daughters, highly organized, just got through nursing school, and what's her job?
she gets everything prepared for the doctors before the surgeries.
So
and that's it. She has to get everything organized.
Yeah,
that's the nurse I want.
Oh, yeah. No, but my son was obsessed with lizards. So he would sit in class and he would stare. He goes, and of course, he would wander off and think, oh, there's a lizard. I wonder if the lizard has a brother. I wonder if his brother is out there, too. I wonder if the lizard's brother and mother are out there also. So they finally had to move him away from the window. But what they also did, because he's at a great school, they said, so when we find books for him to read, because he also is dyslexic, we found books with lizards. And all of a sudden, he didn't care about Penny and her cookie baking. But when it was the lizards, all of a sudden, he's reading. So
my son became obsessed on the Titanic, and he taught himself physics of that. He taught himself about metallurgy and the tensile strength of the rivets, and I mean, all of these, and I'm just letting him go because he had this passion, and his brain, he was so, he hunted that thing down and killed it.
I mean, there you go. Well, you have seen these popular videos online showing temper tantrums. Dr. Tarnow talked about being that angry kid. And so every kid goes through their moments, but sometimes with kids like this, it's just much more pronounced.
Yes, because they have, as part of the hunter, that emotional reactivity. And when they are having a temper tantrum, that is in their fight or flight. They are at the end of their rope and they can't tolerate anything anymore.
They gotta let it all out.
Right, and the problem with ADHD is they don't have the ability to self-manage.
Especially at that age.
At that age, especially, they're learning self-management at that point.
All right, let's go to the phone lines. Good morning, Andre.
Good morning.
What's your question or comment?
I just wanted to thank you so much for this segment. I have been going through this for over 43 years, and basketball was the only thing that kept me focused until they came up with no play, no pass, no play. And so year after year, I'm just going through, like the doctor said, self-management. Now I have opened my own barbershop, and I'm still trying to deal with other kids or people in the same segment or situation as myself. So I want to again thank you. And I'll be quiet now.
Andre, well, thank you very much. Yeah, you know, before we had so much attention on this, people had to struggle to find their way. And you had, I know you've talked about your mother was just, she was on it with you. But there are a lot of parents that are at a loss and they don't know what to do. One thing that we've relied on, of course, is medication. We have Myrtle with us this morning. Myrtle? Where is Myrtle at? Okay, let's get that microphone back to Myrtle because Myrtle had a question. There you go.
Thank you. My question is, what do you do when you have a child that complains about the side effects of the medication that you're giving them?
Yeah, okay.
They don't want to take it.
All right, what are the side effects that they're having?
They said it makes them feel funny.
Okay, so...
So, you know, like overstimulated or something like that.
Yeah,
you know. Which
I guess could be a dosing problem. But the medication, let's just put that to rest right now because you hear arguments on both sides that it's effective and other people say you're using it out of convenience and the long-term effects for kids are bad.
Well, I think that when you're using it at convenience is when you're only using medicine and you're not doing the work as a parent that you have to do to create an environment that is helpful for that child. As a parent, I get into these conversations where parents say, I'm not going to use medicine, and then they use medicine and they don't do the other work.
Right.
They don't develop the programs that the child needs at home. And that's really the key. It is, as a psychiatrist who gives medicine, it is a dilemma for me because I'm always afraid to give medicine too early because if I do, it helps, and then the parent just walks away and says, oh, problem is solved.
Yeah.
And I do not believe in using medicine as the only intervention ever.
Or in some cases, or most cases, you probably don't want to be on that medication forever unless it's necessary, but...
Well, but medicine is very helpful for kids who have ADHD in school.
If they need
and that's the problem, to help them focus. But I want to tell you that this problem you raise about the side effects is very important. Now, in this 2015, we have ways to know what's the right medicine for that child. Because that's genetic.
And it can change.
Right.
And it can change, but it's genetic. So we have to do the studies to understand what that child needs. How does that medication metabolized? And the other is, what about their brain? What's the electrical activity in the brain that's causing the problem? Not everybody who has the diagnosis ADD has the same brain. And that's the important thing for us to realize, is we got to look at the underlying problem and understand what it is.
Yeah.
And there's always a three protocol discipline. You want to give medicine for sure, you want therapy for sure, and behavior modification for sure. So as Dr. Tarnow said, you want to bring in the parents so that they work with the psychiatrist, with the school, to create the proper environment to address those three things. And because you're dealing with the prefrontal cortex, you can have problems that co-occur, like you can have an ADHD child who has anxiety problems or OCD, and so some medicines that or depression and medicines that work.
ADHD usually comes with a friend, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like dyslexia and all those other
and
things.
medicine that works for anxiety wouldn't work necessarily for the ADHD.
Right.
So sometimes you have to choose, what are you going to treat? And so at the end of the day, going to a really good psychiatrist, neuropsychiatrist.
And communicating with your doctor, because if he's not feeling
doctor.
right, that's when you know things might need to change on that prescription. All right, let's go to Angela. Good morning, Angela.
Good morning.
All right. What's your question or comment?
My name is Angela.
I got that wrong. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's Angela. Good morning, everyone. I'm really curious. I wanted to know how we can be encouraged to be more insightful and gentle and caring parents, that we support our children with whatever type of condition that they may have, just even normal children or can be super rambunctious, as well as children that have ADHD or other conditions. And living here in Houston, I noticed that a lot of people seem to go to judgments and conclusions about children.
And Angela, we're having problems hearing you, but I know your basic question and what she's saying, that like, you know, we have a tendency to judge parents and judge the kids right away, right? And as opposed to really stepping back and understanding this is kind of a part of life. We're part of a community. It takes a village, right? And she's like, how do we alleviate the stress, and also how do we deal with our children? Because I can tell you right now, I think any one of us who have a child like this, I'll sit down and look at my son, and it is time for us to do homework. He's like, no, it's not. And I, no, it is time. I don't think you heard me. It's time to do homework. And he's like, they had me from 8 to 3. I'm done with homework, right? And so it's just like, but he'll give me an intelligent conversation. He's like, well, Mom, it's not doing me any better to do what I already did all day long at school. But it gets frustrating. I just want you to do it. Just do what I told you to do, right? So she's saying, how do we alleviate the stress, and what tips do you have for us to remember that it's not the end of the world and that it's a give and take with that child who frustrates the heck out of you?
Well, you know, every child, as we've discussed here, is different. And you know, we always say it takes a village. I like to say it takes a family.
Yeah.
Everybody pulling together, and when you work together and you go to a school that gives you cues on how to help your child become aware of their own problem and help them deal with their own problem through therapy, through medication, through behavior modification, you make great strides. And so the things that reduce stress mostly help a family, and that includes having dinner together and being together and bonding and meditation and stress reduction things. Music is wonderful. I mean, we find that music really does do something to children. And Baroque music in particular, which is syncopated to your heart in the Largo movement, it's very restful, and relaxation immediately comes. So if you just put it in the background, when my grandchildren were born, I had my children play Baroque music 24/7, just on a little iPod.
Kids, it's even more impactful to that brain.
These things help.
All right. When we come back, and we've mentioned school a couple of times, and they're the parents who, I have friends who absolutely did not believe in medication at all, just don't even bring it up, until they started getting the phone call every day from the school, come get them. Come get them, because they're disrupting the classroom and they're even disrupting the principal's office. Come get them. And so things change in that way. But when it comes to schools, certain schools handle things certain ways. There are also specific schools to deal with children with ADHD, dyslexia, all that type of stuff. We'll talk about that when we come back. And if you
I had trouble reading, and I would open a book and I would start reading at the bottom of the page and then go backwards, and the teachers just thought I was pretty stupid. And I agreed with them. I thought I was just not going to make it. And I had to figure out what to do with my life.
That is fashion designer and icon Tommy Hilfiger, who's a billionaire today. But he's talking about just dealing with ADHD and the whole bit. And he has the same story that most kids do if they're not diagnosed and their parents don't understand, where you were treated like you're stupid and you're dumb. He ended up, you know, just kind of doing his own thing. And everyone thought he was weird and strange, selling old jeans. And of course, that kind of paid. I'm going to start selling old jeans. He's a billionaire. Okay. But he does what he loves today. Let's go to Mehdi. Good morning, Mehdi. Hi there. And what's your question?
I have a 3-year-old great-grandson who goes to preschool. He's very disruptive in the class. He throws things. The parent has to go and pick him up. They have thrown him out of preschool. So now his mom is looking for someplace else to take him.
Yeah. There are a lot of kids and parents who have that same story, where they get, you know, dismissed from a preschool. And when you get dismissed from preschool, you're like, oh my, what's school going to be like, right? But goes back to what we were talking about earlier, of that frustration and that fight or flight. Speaking of schools, there are special schools in town. You mentioned like the Acton Academy, which is an interesting thing that we'll put on our website. But you know, there's the Joy School, the Raynard School, New School in the Heights, all these different schools designed to address this. But they're expensive. You got to have the money. When you don't have the money, what is public school obligated to do, and in your opinion, equipped to do?
Well, you know, they do have special ed, and that's where a child will end up, but that's not necessarily the right place for that child. And
when you say the word special ed, it has a connotation to it.
And the irony of this is that children with ADD, many of them are highly gifted. That we know that there's some correlation between ADD and exceptional intelligence. We're dealing with the prefrontal cortex, which is what makes us human, that part of our brain that makes us who we are. And therefore there is some correlation. So I think parent advocates, you know, I feel that parents have to go to the schools, ask for special care, but they have to go with a prescription. They have to know what their child needs, and they have to address that with the school counselor.
And it's nice to have a doctor's diagnosis.
That's right.
You know, one part of the problem too is people say, well, I think it's, or maybe a teacher who says, you might consider, you really got to go in with the official diagnosis.
And a diagnosis.
Right, but you know, the schools, I think the way in which we approach school is a problem. And that is that schools are set up for the average child, and they have to fit into a certain box.
Exactly.
And then there's special education. And the reality is that getting into special education in our public schools is almost impossible. It is very,
you have to meet
very
so
difficult.
many different requirements.
You do. And then not all schools have that ability to give what that child needs. I think we have to teach the teachers and have consultants who can come into the classroom and work with that teacher in developing something that's special for that child and coming up with a program, because when we've done this, what we found is that everyone in the class gets better.
Exactly.
Everyone improves when you use some of these principles, like taking that 3-year-old and putting them on a positive reinforcement schedule and really focusing on catching them being good and giving them things to do that they love. And for instance, one of the things that I would love to do is to develop software for computers that would teach children like that. Because they have the ability to totally focus.
I'm going to tell you right now, if Minecraft, how many of you know about Minecraft? If Minecraft had an academic component to it, like if you want to build this wall, how many bricks will it take for you to, I'm telling you right now, look, I'm just looking for a 5% cut Minecraft. I'm just telling you, no, if you had lesson plans, Minecraft does it?
Minecraft, there is a place that will use Minecraft to teach kids computer programming, Java.
And there's
and they're little kids.
And there's a company that started in Houston out of Rice, which is developing teaching tools for children that are interesting and active and are perfect for children with attention deficit disorder. There's a daycare, not a daycare, but a preschool called Learning Experience, which is also developing materials for young children that will engage them. Stanford is also having a program in terms of developing software that will engage children in the process of education.
And it's interesting because when I first was dealing with my son, we were made to feel like we were the only ones in the world. They were like, we don't know what is wrong with him, but right? And so, and the funny part is every single one of his friends is the same way. So if something is wrong, we better get something right.
Well, birds of a feather flock together.
That is true. That is true. But there's a whole bunch of birds.
That's right. That's right.
You know,
More birds than not. And to that point, you can use the children. They know.
That's right.
Ask the kids, what do you, all these people who flock together say, what do you think you need in the school day that would help you succeed?
Yeah.
Because they know.
They do.
At Acton Academy, it's not just
right.
this academy, but there's this disruptive education movement where the people, the adults are saying, hey, maybe we should trust these children a little bit more to figure out a solution to their problem.
Right.
So they will gather kids together and they'll brainstorm. They'll do a Socratic roundtable and they'll say, we're not going to tell you what to do, we're going to ask you questions.
All right, kids for school board.
And they come, seriously,
Well, you know,
they come up with the best solution.
I created an empathic process which invests the children in the outcome, also the consequences of their behavior. And it really works. It's like treating an ADD child or an ADHD child like a gifted child, an underachieving gifted child.
All right, hold your thought right there. When we come back, I want to talk about the best way to discipline, because I know my son will look right at me and go, I don't care what you do. I'm still going to do this, and I am willing to take the consequences. That's the scary part when he goes, I'm willing to take that one. All right, we'll be right back.
I was dyslexic. They did not understand that. My parents did not get that at all. So I was grounded for most of. I did not see the moon during my junior year of high school.
That was Henry Winkler, who is dyslexic, and he's now writing books. And the featured character is a little dyslexic boy, and he sees how that child can rise and shine. All right, so before the break, we talked about, and he was just saying he was grounded all the time. What's the best way to deal with children in general, but especially children that we're talking about today? Is it punishing them by taking something away, or rewarding them when they do something good?
Let me tell you what I did with my children. Because of my having ADHD, all my children have ADHD, and my grandchildren have ADHD. But what I did is I had 3 girls, and they had to earn all their clothes.
That'll do it.
Girls never have enough purses, shoes, jewelry, and so as a result of it, they become hunters. And that is, they have a very high stimulation to get that.
Yeah.
And so what I did in my house is everything was positive. Everything was rewards. So when they did their list, that's when they got rewarded. And we sat down on a Friday and we went through, as a family meeting, what were the things, the goals for them to do on their list. And that's when we paid them the money so they can buy the clothes, which was on Friday.
Right, right.
And it became that family meeting.
And it also spills over into work ethic later in life. You do the job, you get your paycheck. And it's interesting because for my son, it's amazing how he couldn't do anything until that reward came. And I'm like, now I know you can do this. You can do this.
And the key here, when you talk about Minecraft, that is the best reward system ever created.
Right.
Yeah, oh yeah. Oh,
but
yeah.
he has to earn every minute.
That and Xbox.
Nothing's free.
Right.
Yeah, I love Bill Gates. I love you. I love you. Okay, Xbox and the whole bit. Okay, let's go to Patricia in our audience. Good morning, Patricia.
Hello.
And
How
what's your
are you?
question?
Glad to be here.
Thank you.
I am a foster parent, and I just need some help. First of all, I have a kid. He just acts out in school. And then when I talk to him about it, he says, well, you know I have ADHD. So, I mean, what do I do? They feed on
I can't
what
help
they
it.
have. I don't.
Yeah, he's like, I can't help it. I have
Yes,
ADHD,
exactly.
So let me continue on with this behavior.
Exactly.
But that is one of the characteristics of ADHD, by the way. One of the characteristics is to blame everybody else. And as you notice, this person is very smart.
Right.
And is able to manipulate you. So my response to that is, that's why you have to work that much harder. Because you have ADHD. And the key there, because people with ADHD are very energetic, right?
Yes.
So you want to focus on working harder and never giving up. And that's one of the things, characteristics of people with ADHD. If you can get them going in that direction, they will never give up.
Oh, thank you.
All right, as we go to break, want to read one of the Facebook comments here. Shannon Zero says, thank you for this show. It is so true how alienating life can be when you feel different and less than everyone else. I love that they said we are all geniuses in our own unique way. And, you know, we're looking at some of these, you know, Tommy Hilfiger, Henry Winkler. It doesn't mean that you can't be successful. And then Adam Levine had ADHD and at one point had so much anxiety and was so shy that when he would play to crowds, he would play with his back facing the crowds. And I'm like, anything Adam Levine is involved in, I want to be involved in. All right, okay, so welcome back to Great Day. Of course, that is famous director and producer Steven Spielberg, who is one of the most successful in his field of all time. He has dyslexia, and he says that creative outlet for him is what kind of got him away from those things of feeling like he was stupid as a child and the whole bit. Okay, let's go to Diane on the phone. Good morning, Diane.
Good morning.
What's your question or comment?
Well, I have a son that's 19 years old and has moved out of the house, got upset with me and moved in with a friend. And I find that he's really not doing well on the outside. He's really kind of going downhill at a fast rate of speed. And I'm trying to figure out how to help him. I had took him off medicine when he was 11 years old because I found he was losing so much weight. He looked like a skeleton, and I didn't find it was really helping him any. I didn't see any change. And I guess I kind of over-sheltered him a little bit, but I find he's really not doing well on the outside, and I really don't know what to do to help him.
And oftentimes when kids, you know, you have them under your roof, it's one thing, but they leave to go to college and all of a sudden they fall apart. And you're like, but you were doing so well. Or in this case, you know, he's not under her guidance anymore. So that's a tough thing. You know, and for any parent, even when you have the so-called average kid, when kids, they lose their mind when they move out of the house.
Well, very tough thing. It's all about preparation. And we, as parents, we have to see this as a marathon to get our child to be able to leave the house. To do that, we have to teach them self-management skills.
Right. But at 19, if he doesn't have those skills.
And at that point, there's all this fear. I was a bad mom, and we have all these guilt feelings. And so we try to micromanage and we jump in too.
But things change too, neurologically. And I would take that child and take him to a neurologist and do a workup and see if the medication he's on or if he needs different medication, because actually parents have so much power really to influence their children. They just don't realize it. And when a child is off at college, there are so many changes in the body, so many hormonal changes, so many emotional changes.
That any average person is dealing with.
And
so
things
now
present themselves that haven't been there yet, like OCD may show up or anxiety may show up, and they co-occur. And so I would step back and have another workup.
Or marijuana.
And marijuana is...
But I would never go to a neurologist for ADHD. I want to make that very clear.
Psychiatrist, yes.
And the reason is because neurologists treat things that people die from. Neurologists treat big deal things. What you have to have is a team. You have to have a psychologist, you have to have an educator, you have to have a psychiatrist, a child psychiatrist. That's the key, is to having this team who can get in and comprehensively evaluate that person.
I'd still do a neurological workup because sometimes there are
I'm a
things,
neurologist also.
It's there.
Dr. J. Tarnow, everybody.
Go right here.
So psychiatrists have their boards in neurology, though. And that's
by the way, you treat adults as well as children.
Because sometimes things are going on and they're chemical and you don't know what's happening.
Well, but a good psychiatrist will do that. A good neuropsychologist, psychiatrist. And for instance,
I feel like I've just gone to medical school.
I do QEGs in my office. Okay?
To Dr. Gross's point, the developmental, just to give you some hope, the 19-year-old, is that the brain is not what's called fully myelinated, right?
It's changing.
The impulse control, the 19-year-old, is not going to be what it is for a 25-year-old. Right? So the brain just matures. And so when I was in private practice, I would teach my mamas. I'd say, just say this over again. Every time they do something weird, just say, he's not fully myelinated.
And that's why the death penalty, that's really why the death penalty doesn't apply until you're 21 now.
You see these people doing these weird things and you think, what? And it's just their brain.
That's right. Adolescence goes through 24, 25.
Well, from my neurological background, I can tell you
the ADHD brain loves what it loves.
The prefrontal cortex doesn't connect until they're about 22, 23
That's
in
right.
normal people.
That's
So just
And
keep saying
children
that.
with
Just
ADHD are behind
Right.
times.
Adolescence
So they
goes
take about
late.
24, 25,
That's
26.
right. It goes
Okay.
late.
Amen.
Absolutely.
Ruby, hello there.
I have a 20-year-old grandson that has Asperger's, and he's graduated high school, but has not been able to get into a college because of his
Okay,
learning
it's interesting. We were talking
disability.
earlier about special education. There's that ARD program, which, you have certain designations that can follow you all the way through college. A lot of parents say, well, I don't want my child to be marked, or whatever, but it really can help you with those special services that we talked about, although you mentioned it's kind of hard to get in there, but it helps you with those special services and can follow you through college. Are colleges more lenient when they have that diagnosis to be able to say, okay, we get this. Maybe this person needs to take a test with, somebody reading the questions to them. Maybe whatever.
Yes, the answer is yes. And I want to say something I forgot to say earlier. That parents have a lot of power,
right?
Even with the school board. And so if they execute that power, they'll be surprised at how much they can.
It's a process.
Get
I mean, you have to
accomplished.
convince
It's
them
right,
sometimes, but
right.
you can't
You
get
have to
through
do
there.
your homework as a parent. You
Yeah.
have to know what's cooking.
And your children, Dr. Tarnell, you mentioned, who have ADHD as well, went off to college and were able to negotiate that.
Yes, and I think that having accommodations and are very important. And so we made sure that our children understood what they had, what their learning differences were, how they could compensate, and we had their accommodations in college.
Right.
And we used those accommodations to give them what they needed. And I tell you, it's not as easy in terms of when you're a parent, you have to fight for your child,
That's right.
but you have to be armed. You have to know what to fight for.
This is the law. This is what I'm willing to do. Here is our actual diagnosis from a real doctor, from a neuropsychiatrist. We'll be right back. There is Justin Timberlake. We all know him. His mom put him in the Mickey Mouse Club, so he had a creative outlet for his ADHD. And Michael Phelps, very well publicized that his mom put him into swimming to help him focus. We've said over and over again, burn some calories, burn some energy. He's won more Olympic medals than anyone ever with 22 of them. All right, we have Felipa in the audience with us this morning. Good morning, Felipa. What's your question?
Good morning. My name is Felipa. The question that I have this morning, great topic, by the way. I would like to know, what are the early detections or signs of your child experiencing ADD or ADHD?
And which, by the way, let me just go ahead. The difference between ADD and ADHD, that H is the hyperactivity part.
Right.
Yeah, okay. All right, so early signs that might clue you into, maybe we should go see a doctor.
Well, just what we were talking about, not being able to sit still, hyperactivity, if it is ADHD.
Kicked out of daycare.
Right, kicked out of daycare, not being able to focus except on what they're interested in particular, losing things, being forgetful, not paying attention, all the things that you see in your child. And if you saw one, it would be no problem. Two, no problem. But when you see this spectrum of characteristics, you go, uh-oh.
Yeah. And that kind of thought process, like my son is the fastest kid in school. And the reason why he didn't make the track team is because he wouldn't try out for all the other things. He looked at the coach and said, clearly I'm a sprinter. I don't need to throw a shot put or do a discus or anything. I'm a sprinter. Just put me in the fast stuff. Do the relay, the 100-meter, whatever. And their thing was, but the rules are you have to actually do all of these things. He's like, that is a waste of time. I know what I'm good at. Let me do what I'm good at, and then leave the rest to somebody else who might be good at that. But anyway.
Well, and sleep problems.
And sleep.
Yeah.
Sleep problems are also a very early sign. I like to say to parents, if the terrible twos never end,
Oh, yes.
That's great.
that's ADHD.
Yeah, all right. I want to say,
That's great.
Crystal Garcia on Facebook says, my son has ADHD and it's a struggle every day in school because of his behavior and feels like the teacher is always picking on him and he just can't seem to make friends. He says kids call him weird and different. As a parent, what should she do? And this is so tough here because it's not only the issue of dealing with, actually succeeding in school, because eventually you got to get through school. It is that socialization that pushes kids sometimes to that other side of children that they might not should be hanging hanging out with because they feel like they have no choice.
And that's why I love that you open with some of these famous people who have struggled too, because when we put in front of our children these heroes who are like them and have succeeded in the world, that gives them a sense of connectedness, and it also says, this is not a problem. It can be a huge blessing. So to be able to tell these stories daily around the breakfast table, go on the internet and find famous ADHD people.
Yeah, no, it is there. It is there.
That's right.
It is amazing what people can do with this quote-unquote disability.
And the point was, parents kept moving them around, putting them in things until they found what they liked, because they're not going to like everything. You know, we put my son in soccer because he's athletic. We thought, oh, this is great. And then they didn't win a single game. And my son's like, oh, we were fantastic. Oh, we were awesome. I was like, no, you didn't win a single game. but you know, he's like, okay, maybe that's not my thing. But you have to move them around till they find that thing, but it's expose them to something.
That's right. Steven Spielberg's mother allowed him to walk around with a camera. She bought him a camera when he was a little boy, and that camera was his ally, and ultimately that was his career. But she let him find his gift, and that's what I tell parents all the time. Let your child find their gift, and then let them go with it. It's sort of the way we treat underachieving gifted children. We let them do what they find that they really love.
Yeah. David Yerman, interviewed him several years ago, and it was a great story. He said that he had to write a book report in high school, and he's dyslexic. So he said he found the book that had the most pictures in it. And he goes, that's all I grabbed. And it was a jewelry making book. But he became mesmerized. He said he stuck that book under his bed and he kept pulling it out and looking at it over and over again. And so David Yerman is America's most prolific jeweler of all time. So you never know. You just have to connect. Of course, he says the thing that he had to do was find the right wife, because he was mailing jewelry off to people who go, you sent me some jewelry, we didn't order it. It's like, oh, the address was a little wrong. Let's put that back. And so you find out the person who can fill in your holes and compliment you, and you have all these little tricks and things that you do. I know, Dr. Turner, you say that for you, you walk from office to office, you always write yourself a note, so that by the time you end up 20 feet down the hall, you realize why you were walking down the hall.
Absolutely. But you know, the best thing in the world is that we have iPhones.
Yes.
Which was created by somebody who has ADHD, who took one college course, right? And the thing is, the iPhone is a perfect mechanism to deal with ADHD. You just have to use it. It's better than the piece of paper.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the 3-year-old gets an iPhone.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.